Shadow Burglar is a stealth game made in Unreal Engine by Ghostly Productions and published by CNM. It's a student project made by a team of people who all have very French-looking names. It starts by showing you a painting with the artist's name on it, then promptly playing a gunshot and showing a news article that the artist has been killed. Enter your character, a noir-esque redhead who visits the grave. Turns out the dead guy is her brother and she wants to get the painting back. Then she gets possessed or something, and Sans undertales the camera before you fade into the story. The between-level story segments are drawn as comic panels and partly animated with voice acting done to match. It's also done in a noir kind of style. They're short, but they only need to be because the story is basic, and it's a nice visual quirk from the game visuals. The first level is a tutorial pretty much. It tells you that you can vanish into the shadows to hide but will reappear in the light. You can left click to jump between shadow patches or people's shadows to get a free ride through light areas. And you can perform a takedown, which involves tentacling people into the shadow realm, but you can only do it if you're all in the shadows. You can't do a takedown on someone from inside their own shadow. It's an interesting mechanic, and from the looks of it, the borders of the light and dark are pretty solid for the transition. There weren't really any noticeable points where you popped out of the dark where you shouldn't, or vice versa. It's hard to tell who here actually has the powers, since the shadow guy that talks to you that possessed you at your brother's grave seems to like taking responsibility for yoinking people into the shadow realm. However, when you reach the shadow teleport things, he asks you if you think you have any kind of special powers, and I can't tell if that was meant as a doubt to if you can get through the gate, or a kind of slightly condescending jab that you're relying on his powers. The Steam store description says that you are the one with the power to morph with the shadows, and it would be a little weird if you, as the burglar, didn't have any powers, since, well, the title is Shadow Burglar, and that implies that you're the shadow controlling one. After finding the painting, you have a second level where you end up on a ship after having to jump in a crate with the painting you found to avoid detection. I initially came out of the game here to take a break, but found out on reload that the game doesn't actually save, so you have to restart from the beginning. But obviously, if you've done it once, it's not too hard to do it again. The aim of level 2 is to get off the ship, I think. It was one of those levels where there's not much direction and I just kind of went wherever the guards were, because if there's one rule to video games, it's that wherever there are enemies, there is progress. You find in this level that the spirit with you is actually your dead artist brother who somehow jumped into your consciousness from heaven and has the power to pull people into the void via you, as some kind of conduit maybe? He even talks to you about your other family members in heaven, and you tell him he deserves to be there, but, I don't know, pulling people doing their job into an otherworldly dimension that may or may not mean death to help your sister steal things, even if they were things that you owned, taken by bad people, is kinda suspicious. The voice prompts for things in the game are usually fine, but there was one where I took a side route through a vent to an upper level, and then backtracked and got rid of a guard. When I did, the brother's voice came to tell me that we should go back and find another way. If I'd come straight up the stairs earlier, that guard would have spotted me and I couldn't have avoided him since he was in the light and unmoving, so the prompt would have made sense. But it seems the prompt was set up to the area and not the context, since I came at him from behind and there was no need to go back anywhere. There was also a moment where I had to get rid of a guy, or I thought I had to, and he had a light switch behind him. The guards can be pretty NPC in that they usually only spot you in their torchlight, or if they're facing you, even if you're out of the shadows and running around. They have a detection meter that you can fill part way, but if it doesn't hit the top, they don't chase you or consider you detected. It's more of a warning. But the only way to get to the switch was to reappear into the light and then press it, and as he was facing the other way, I tried my luck. It didn't work, likely because the guards have some detection proximity behind them, but when I got to that area again after restarting the checkpoint, I assumed the game saved that I pulled the switch because this time he was in the dark and I could just get rid of him easily. There are collectibles you can find. The first I picked up by accident without spotting, and once you pick them up you can still interact with the spot they were in and make noise if you want, but they set off a bit of a discussion between you and your brother about the family, and it seems all the items have some relation to your family members or were owned by Will, your brother. I don't know if they're his ones, but you burgle them anyway. The second level is pretty fluid, since some areas you don't need to faff with, or you can explore to your heart's content. It'd be easy to get lost, but it was at least good enough for me to know when I was in a new area. The layout is all corridor and doors, but the objects in the environment usually help you figure out if you've seen the place before, and so do the enemies. The last bit was kind of hard to do without detection, since there were no light switches to turn off and no way to get rid of the patrolling guard, but I just relied on his NPC detection limits, pushed the obstacle and ran, and it was fine. Level 3 is pretty short, still in the ship but with a bit more actual sneaking needed, and the end is a run for the painting. You don't have to sneak back out with it, you just end up putting it back where it came from, and as a nice touch you put all the stuff you stole onto your brother's grave. The puzzles for me weren't too difficult. With the pushy stuff it's not too hard to know what to do since you're either unblocking a path or creating a shadow with it. Either way, shoving it to a place it wasn't before seemed to do the trick somehow. There was a tricky looking section with a lot of light, but actually the jumping into shadows mechanic is pretty overpowered in those areas and can get you where you need to go no problem. It's sadly a short play of maybe 20 to 30 minutes or so. The artwork is nice and bright but nothing too mind-blowing. The NPCs follow set paths and aren't too quick off the ball. You can distract them with stuff but they don't really search too hard, they just stand a bit and then leave, and they don't stray their path even if they partly detect you, or they don't seem to. Jumping between shadows is probably the most borderline mechanic for me. You can't do it through solid objects, which I can appreciate, but the game seems to not have decided on its range or a way to tell you that you may still be interacting with an object's parameters despite thinking your angle is fine. There were a few times I tried to jump into a guy's shadow. It was lit up and animated like I could do, and I had to be off to the side because he had a torch shone, but it wouldn't accept that I could do the jump. I left the mouse pressed so that the shadow would come back into range and light up, but sometimes it made you come closer even if it was lit up, and sometimes it just didn't accept that your pathway was clear perhaps, even though it looked like it was. The music is chill, again in the noir-y genre, and the voice acting is very good for all the parties. One part with a ship tannoy announcement did just kinda sound like someone getting close to a mic and putting their hands around it, but it was all vocally good.
Everyone with a ticket, please get on board.
The story was enough to carry the game in its short duration, and though the whole shadow powers thing isn't really outlined as to whose is whose and where they came from, since it was a student project I assume they either didn't have the time or capacity to invest in that, or in more levels. I like that it allows you to tilt the camera round corners to look ahead. That's a nice benefit of the third-person view, though it does also mean you get some fun vanishing off camera right at the start of the game. It's a decent little game and allows you a bit of creative gameplay option, and has a few achievements which aren't too hard to get but encourage a bit of exploration. As usual with student projects, they all seem to have a limit to their time and content capacity, but it's an enjoyable little puzzle game and would be good to see more. Overall, I would give Shadow Burglar a 7.5 out of 10.